At 14, Elizabeth Smart was taken from her own bedroom while her younger sister lay only feet away. For 9 months, millions searched for her. Then, one afternoon, strangers noticed a veiled girl walking beside a man on a Utah street and realized the missing child had been in plain sight. The night began like any other in the Smart family home above Salt Lake City. On June 4, 2002, Elizabeth attended an awards event at her middle school. Summer was beginning, and graduation was only days away. After returning home, she went to the bedroom she shared with her 9-year-old sister, Mary Catherine. Their parents checked the house, the children settled down, and the lights went out. Hours later, Mary Catherine woke to a man standing near Elizabeth's bed. He held a weapon and warned Elizabeth not to make a sound. Mary Catherine stayed completely still, terrified that any movement might place both sisters in danger. She watched the stranger lead Elizabeth out of the room and disappear into the dark house. For a few moments, the child could not move. Then she ran to her parents and told them Elizabeth was gone. At first, the scene seemed impossible. There had been no crash, no alarm, and no scream loud enough to wake the family. But a damaged window screen confirmed that someone had entered the house. Police arrived, and the search expanded before sunrise. Officers, relatives, neighbors, and volunteers covered streets, parks, construction sites, and the steep foothills surrounding the neighborhood. Elizabeth's photograph appeared on television and on thousands of missing person posters. Her parents spoke publicly again and again, hoping that one viewer would recognize her. The scale of the response reflected how unusual the crime appeared. A child had vanished from a bedroom inside an occupied family home. There was no ransom demand and no clear route away from the neighborhood. News crews gathered outside as investigators tried to protect evidence and answer a question that troubled everyone watching: how could a stranger enter, choose one child, and leave without waking the house? For the Smart family, public attention had two sides. Television kept Elizabeth's face visible, but it also turned every rumor into breaking news. Reporters examined relatives, neighbors, and workers. Viewers formed theories with little evidence. Her parents endured the speculation because silence seemed more dangerous. If Elizabeth was still alive, they wanted her to see that no one had stopped looking. The investigation quickly became enormous. Tips arrived from across the country, but most led nowhere. Search teams followed rumors, checked abandoned buildings, and examined places where a frightened teenager might have been hidden. Each false lead consumed time. Each day without an answer made the possibility of finding Elizabeth alive seem more distant. Some callers genuinely believed they had seen her. Others repeated stories from friends or reported dreams as clues. Investigators had to treat urgent information seriously while separating observation from imagination. The result was a growing mountain of notes, maps, telephone records, and interview summaries. Somewhere inside that volume might be the answer, but there was no reliable way to know which detail mattered. Detectives also focused on people who had previously entered the Smart home. One former worker attracted intense suspicion and public attention, but the theory did not bring Elizabeth back. Meanwhile, the most important witness was still trying to understand a memory formed in darkness. Mary Catherine had seen little of the intruder, yet she had heard his voice. The man had called himself Emmanuel. Months before the kidnapping, Elizabeth's mother had met him in downtown Salt Lake City. He asked for work, and she hired him for a day to help repair the roof and rake leaves. To the family, he appeared to be a poor traveling laborer. His real name was Brian David Mitchell. Mary Catherine did not connect the voice immediately. She was 9 years old, traumatized, and had heard the kidnapper speak only briefly. Roughly 4 months later, the memory returned with sudden clarity. She told her parents that the man in the bedroom had sounded like Emmanuel. That recognition changed the direction of the case, but it did not produce an immediate rescue. Investigators questioned whether a child could reliably identify a voice after so much time. Mitchell had worked at the house for only 1 day. There was no known address, no stable job, and almost no information that could lead police to him. The Smart family refused to let the clue disappear. They worked with an artist to create a sketch of the man they remembered. When they felt the investigation was moving too slowly, they released the image publicly. It was a risky decision. If Emmanuel was responsible, national attention might frighten him into moving Elizabeth again. But without the sketch, no one knew whom to report. While her family fought to keep the search alive, Elizabeth was being held surprisingly close to home. Mitchell had taken her into the mountains above Salt Lake City, to a hidden camp where Wanda Barzee was waiting. Barzee was Mitchell's wife and partner. Together, they controlled Elizabeth through isolation, disguises, repeated threats, and the constant claim that her family would be harmed if she resisted. Mitchell built his control around fear. He told Elizabeth that escape would bring punishment not only to her, but also to the people she loved. He presented himself as a religious authority and used invented rules to make obedience appear unavoidable. The claims were false, yet a captive teenager had no safe way to test them. This point matters because outsiders often ask why a victim did not simply run when a door opened or strangers appeared. Captivity is not defined only by walls and locks. A person can be controlled by threats, exhaustion, shame, surveillance, and the belief that one wrong move will cause someone else's death. Elizabeth later described choosing survival one decision at a time. The first camp was hidden in rough terrain not far from the neighborhood. Searchers came painfully close to the area, yet vegetation and the shape of the hillside concealed what was there. From the mountains, Elizabeth could sometimes sense the city continuing below her. Her face was on posters throughout that same city, but she could not reach the people searching for her. As the months passed, Mitchell and Barzee began taking Elizabeth into public places. They forced her to wear long clothing and a veil that concealed much of her face. The disguise changed the way strangers saw her. Instead of a famous missing child, people saw a quiet member of an unusual religious group and looked away. The three traveled on public transportation, visited parks, entered restaurants, and stayed near other people. Every trip created the possibility of discovery. It also placed Elizabeth beside the people threatening her family. She had no telephone, no private conversation, and no certainty that a stranger would believe her before Mitchell intervened. Mitchell also controlled the story she was expected to tell. If anyone asked questions, Elizabeth had to use another name and present herself as part of the group. Repeating that identity did not mean she accepted it. It meant that every public encounter was being watched. A single doubtful pause could alert Mitchell before a stranger understood what was happening. This is why the later rescue depended on more than simply placing a police officer nearby. The officer needed enough information to challenge Mitchell's explanation and enough time to question Elizabeth separately. Until the sketch connected Emmanuel to a known person, most encounters looked strange but not necessarily criminal. One of the closest missed opportunities occurred in a public library. A detective approached after receiving a report that the veiled girl might be Elizabeth Smart. He asked to see her face. Mitchell objected and claimed the veil could not be removed for religious reasons. The encounter ended without her identity being confirmed. To someone hearing the story later, that moment is almost unbearable. A police officer was standing close enough to speak with Elizabeth, yet the search continued. But the failure also shows how Mitchell used ordinary social hesitation as a shield. He counted on people avoiding confrontation, respecting the disguise, and accepting his explanation. Eventually, Mitchell took Elizabeth and Barzee away from Utah and into California. Distance weakened the chance that a local resident would recognize them. It also separated Elizabeth further from the streets, mountains, and voices she knew. Mitchell appeared confident that the national search had failed. Elizabeth, however, listened carefully to his beliefs and learned how he justified his decisions. She understood that direct resistance could bring violence. Instead, she began speaking in terms he accepted. She persuaded him that returning to Utah fit the religious purpose he claimed to follow. It was a quiet act of strategy, not submission. Back in Utah, the public search finally gained the image it had been missing. On February 3, 2003, the Smart family released the composite sketch of Emmanuel. News programs broadcast the face. America's Most Wanted showed the image to a national audience. Viewers were no longer looking only for Elizabeth. They were looking for the man who might be controlling her. The change was crucial. Elizabeth's appearance could be hidden by fabric, posture, and fear. Mitchell could not hide every feature of his own face while walking through public places. The sketch converted Mary Catherine's private memory into something millions of strangers could compare with the people around them. The sketch reached members of Mitchell's extended family. A relative recognized Emanuel as Brian David Mitchell and contacted authorities. For the first time, investigators had a full name connected to Mary Catherine's remembered voice. They also had photographs that could be shown to the public. The case now moved in a different direction. Mitchell's face circulated through news reports, while police examined his background and movements. Still, he was not immediately located. The central problem remained unchanged. Elizabeth could be standing in public, but the clothing forced upon her made recognition difficult. On March 12, 2003, Mitchell, Barzee, and Elizabeth were walking through Sandy, a city south of Salt Lake City. Their robes and veils attracted attention. People who had seen the recent television coverage thought the man resembled the suspect in the sketch. A caller contacted 911. Police reached the group and separated the youngest person from the adults. Elizabeth was now 15. For 9 months, she had been warned that revealing herself would bring disaster. Even with officers present, fear did not vanish instantly. The questions had to continue until she understood that Mitchell could no longer control the conversation. An officer showed her a missing person image and asked whether she was Elizabeth Smart. Slowly, the identity Mitchell had tried to erase returned. She confirmed who she was. The officers arrested Mitchell and Barzee, and the longest 9 months of the Smart family's life ended on an ordinary public street. The confirmation was handled cautiously. Officers could see that the teenager was frightened and reluctant to speak in normal terms. Once she was separated from the adults, their questions became more direct. Small details aligned with the missing person case. The impossible report arriving over police radio was becoming real. Elizabeth Smart had been found alive. The news moved across the country within hours. People who had followed the case expected another false report or a tragic discovery. Instead, Elizabeth was alive. Her parents received the call they had refused to stop hoping for, and she was reunited with her family that day. The rescue did not erase what had happened, and it did not end the legal process. Questions about Mitchell's mental competency delayed the case for years. Wanda Barzee pleaded guilty in federal court in 2009 to kidnapping and unlawfully transporting a minor. She agreed to cooperate and received a 15-year sentence. Brian David Mitchell went to federal trial in 2010. Elizabeth testified about the kidnapping, the threats, the public encounters, and the methods he used to control her. The jury convicted him of interstate kidnapping and unlawful transportation of a minor. In May 2011, a federal judge sentenced him to life in prison. The courtroom outcome established responsibility, but Elizabeth refused to let the crime define the rest of her life. She returned to school, later attended university, built a family, and became an advocate for survivors. Her foundation has supported education, prevention, recovery, and conversations that remove shame from victims. Her story also changed the meaning of the case. It is not only about the night a child was taken from a locked home. A younger sister held onto a voice. Her parents released a sketch when progress had stalled. Strangers paid attention to 3 unusual figures. Most importantly, a survivor guided her captor back toward the place where she could be recognized. The most haunting part is how often Elizabeth was physically near help. Searchers were close to the mountain camp. Crowds passed her in public. A detective spoke to her in a library. The rescue happened only after several incomplete observations were connected. They included a remembered voice, a worker called Emanuel, a family sketch, a relative's identification, and a 911 call from someone who chose not to ignore a suspicion. Elizabeth Smart was not rescued by a single perfect clue. She was found because people continued looking after earlier chances had failed. Her survival turned a story of control into one of recognition. The face hidden behind a veil was seen again, and the name she had been forbidden to speak finally brought her home.